South China Morning Post, 9th of September 2023, Asia must overcome the polarizing ideology as the West takes advantage of the India-China gaps. Chinese diplomatic aggression has backfired on China, widening the gulf between the two countries. Following the Brics summit in South Africa last month, the G20 Leaders Conference in India and the Asian politicians' gathering in Indonesia this past week signaled the pinnacle of summit season in Asia. With US President Joe Biden, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and French President Emmanuel Macron eager to advance the Western agenda at the G20 summit, this represents a coming of age for Asian countries. It appears that everyone is pounding a path to Asia's door. Even though this shifting power balance will ultimately lead to a more political and economic equilibrium between the North and the South, there will undoubtedly be chaotic moments during the transition, which Western countries will probably try to take advantage of to return things to how they were before. This is becoming more apparent as observers, particularly those in the West, highlight the distinctions between China and India. For example, they label President Xi Jinping's decision to skip the G20 meeting in New Delhi as a snub and attribute it to the two nations' territorial disputes. Undoubtedly, tensions between China and India extend beyond matters of the border. They are a reflection of different historical events and cultural beliefs. However, they are being purposefully made worse by pressuring India to join so-called Indo-Pacific initiatives designed to undermine Asia-Pacific collaboration. These include the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, also known as the Quad, a strategic security conference for Australia, India, Japan, and the US, and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, IPEF, which was started by the Biden administration and involves the US, Australia, and Japan among others. India has so far been able to bridge the challenging gap between the Asia-Pacific and Indo-Pacific regions. Nonetheless, the India-China axis is the weak link that maintains the integrity of the Brics bloc and binds the G20's rising and developed nations together. While domestic and regional agreements in Asia, such as the China-led Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, appear to be characterized by pragmatism, particularly in economic and financial cooperation, contentious ideology has intruded from the outside. Forums where Western and Eastern, or North and South, nations try to cohabit and work have become dominated by the cult of allies versus enemies, so-called shared values, which in reality are shared only in part, and a for us or against us mindset. This is unacceptable in light of Asia's severe socio-economic problems, not the least of which is the existential threat posed by climate change. There is a vast agenda to address, and organizations like the G20 and Brics are ideal venues, but only if outside politics aren't weakening them. One example of a well-intentioned project gone bad is China's Belt and Road Initiative. This kind of international infrastructure project, initiated by Xi, was required to sustain and disperse economic expansion by reviving historic trade routes. It was not intended to bring China worldwide dominance more than the Silk Road did centuries before. An effort to link China and Central Asia with markets, the Belt and Road is a land and sea-based trade strategy. However, Western animosity against emerging nations has undermined it for now. Unsurprisingly, some of these powers, most significantly, the US, want to return in time. How easy life seemed 30 years ago, when the Soviet Union had fallen, China was resurfacing but still not posing a threat, the European Union had just been established, and Asia was mostly calm, at least to those who weren't looking too carefully. The United States was in charge, as everyone knew. In case consultation with the global community was required, it was facilitated through various organizations such as the United Nations, G7, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, OECD, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations or the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, Forum in Asia. Neither the G20 nor the several other organizations that have since been established in Asia existed. But it was a parody of an international system, with a dozen or so countries, out of the 200 that comprise the world total, claiming to speak for the world and controlling the few existing multilateral organizations. It was an order that would be expanded upon and then altered. But every time growing states in Asia, Latin America, or elsewhere seem to be moving toward power-sharing arrangements, the West, a somewhat vague geopolitical entity even in the best of times, seems driven into a near panic. However, despite the numerous barriers put in their way by those who perceive the process of economic evolution as a threat, emergent powers are sure to arise. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, an Eastern European who runs an organization with headquarters in Washington, said at the last ASEAN summit in Jakarta that external shocks had left scars on the economies of the Asian region. She stated, "Economic fragmentation makes it even harder. Dynamic open economies like ASEAN would be severely impacted if the world broke up into separate economic blocs." She said, that we work together to combat this threat, saying it is essential. "We can only hope that the pragmatics of Asia will triumph over the defensive and aggressive forces threatening to bring the globe to the brink of war. Statesmanship is required for this, and Asia appears to possess more of it presently than the West."